Donald Trump has ordered the deployment of 2 nuclear submarines in response to what he's called foolish and inflammatory threats from a former president of Russia. The US president has accused Dmitry Medvedev, who is now deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, of making, and I quote, highly provocative statements when he recently warned of war between the two countries. So let's speak now to Robert Fox, defence editor for the Evening Standard. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Hello, yeah. Hi.
Just first up, how much of this is kind of cosmetic and there to be seen, or is this a genuine existential threat that we should all be particularly worried about?
I'm afraid to say it's the boy who called wolf. The trouble is that this back and forth with threats goes on for a long time. And the two prize offenders on the Russian side, because they hype it up, are Medvedev, former prime minister, former president, indeed, alternating with Putin, and Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. You know, instead of turning the volume down, they crank it up. The background to this, as you can guess, is Trump giving 12 days and then 10 days for Russia to come to a really serious ceasefire arrangement, to start talks for a ceasefire in Ukraine, or America would double down on sanctions, but secondary sanctions, that is, sanctions on partners that are trading with Russia despite the general sanction. And there's one in particular that comes up first, and that is India. And Trump himself has been very, very critical of India, which buys a lot of Russian hydrocarbons, particularly discounted oil at the moment. And this quite clearly is worrying Putin, because he's trying to close off the war. He's in the middle of a major summer offensive in Ukraine. It's when you get this sort of blathering about we're going to do, well, we're really confronting the West, which is what Medvedev has been saying, which has provoked this move. And it's when the talk really starts getting into some very silly moves.
Where have the submarines been moved to exactly?
If I knew,
but I mean, do we have a sort of region? Is it?
Either Trump or Putin would have to kill me. No, it's highly secret. These are ballistic boats that are moving very close within range, but within range could be a couple of thousand kilometers. But it is very, very serious that the commander-in-chief is threatening this kind of stuff. It came out on Twitter, but I think he got fed up with what is now looking like quite a barrage of counter threats to this thing of, you know, come to a ceasefire arrangement within 12 and then 10 days or else. Because it's not only Medvedev that's been doing this on a visit to Belarus with the Belarus commander. Putin himself has spoken in the last few hours saying, don't threaten me, chum. I know what I'm doing. I'm quite prepared to talk peace. I'm for peace in Ukraine on my terms. And we know what those terms are. No NATO for Ukraine, almost neutral to non-existent armed forces there. Virtually, Ukraine then falls into Russia, which is what he's always wanted ever since he came to power, and it just becomes a cipher, rather like Belarus itself is neighboring. It's really very dependent on Russia, and that's what he's aiming for. I do think we are. It's funny, we're concentrated on the Middle East, which is very, very serious indeed, but we've come to a flex point too in the Ukraine conflict.
I just think, I sat here earlier this year when there was the Oval Office bust up, and things seemed so this seems so remote now. This is quite a journey that Trump's been on in his relations with Russia and Putin.
It is very, very strange. And there was a relationship, and there is a kind of relationship which I think even predates Trump coming to power, and we occasionally have comes and goes, and it's not proven of the Russian decisive influence in an influence campaign for the first election of Trump in 2016 to the presidency. But there is something going on in America where attitudes are hardening. It's very interesting that Pete Hegseth, who was not very keen, he's the defense secretary, another Trump Fox News creation, that got there. He's very reluctant to actually discharge his office, as he was hinting the other day, as defense secretary, or wants to get out, because now the chips are down and there's some really hard things going on. Because Putin, I think that they've realized Putin lives or finishes in power by war. He's got to continue the war, and he's got to continue this offensive, because he needs to show that he is winning. He needs to go back to the Russian people to declare some kind of victory. When you've got such total control in Russia, it sounds mad for me to be saying that. But next year he's got elections. He's got elections to the parliament, the Duma, and there will be regional elections right across the country. These election campaigns, and we know what the results will be, but they're like opinion polls sounding in the open air, very open, and people know about it, and attitudes are aired. And he's got to show that the war is popular. This is why, if we go back to the famous, glorious dissident, Alex Navalny, that's why he campaigned right across Russia. That's why he was such a threat. And that's why the regime wanted to get rid of him. And they did get rid of him.
Okay, Robert Fox, defence editor for the Evening Standard. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Ноль, опустить перископ. 21 метр. 22.
Пусто держа.